started. Welcome. Sorry. Welcome to our annual members meeting. It's wonderful to see so much life and energy in the Ron Ball Gallery. I love, there's a little plaque outside this room. Ron Ball, he loved wild sheep, and I think we all do. So thank you, Ron, for that quote. We're going to open today's presentation with our board president, Ms. Carolyn Gillette. So Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind, please step on up. And before we do that, Garrett, if you could just, our folks who are virtually, could you just write in the chat if you can hear us? They can? Oh, perfect. Jared, chat.
I think this is the.
Great.
user.
Yeah, this is the microphone.
Okay.
All right, so Carolyn, take it away.
All right. Well, glad you're all here. It's great to have you. Lois, come up forward. Good. Okay. All right. Lots of ventilation back there.
Just take one step back.
Here.
Perfect. Yes. Awesome.
Okay. Volume's good.
Yes, volume's good.
I don't have a lot of volume, but
You're
okay.
good. You're good.
So never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And of course, that's our Margaret Mead, which is a dear and favorite quote. But that is only the beginning of this story. I'd like to add that's how it starts. But when it makes a real difference is when the group grows from a small group to a large group of organized, thoughtful, committed citizens. And thank you for being a part of that group for so many years. Also, I'd like to say it might be discouraging in our current world to think that you can make a difference. I know I often feel overwhelmed. So we have to start small and then grow. And of course, this particular crowd, when we think of Du Bois and we think of volunteers, here are some of the rock stars that show up for all kinds of things. And we really appreciate that. So this year in 2023 will mark 30 years that this center has been caring for wild sheep and the landscape that they inhabit in our backyard. We begin by choosing to be stewards of the Whiskey Mountain herd for the last 30 years. And how many people were there or here 30 years ago? That's great.
Oh, we're dating ourselves.
I know, we are dating ourselves. That's pretty cool.
Another quote right here.
So members of that herd, of the Whiskey Mountain herd, the Whiskey Mountain herd bighorns has been transplanted all over the country. We want to follow their lead and influence the health and well-being of the national population of wild sheep. That's what we're setting our sights on. Now we are challenged to embrace the national part of our name. It's been there for 30 years, the National Bighorn Sheep Center. Now we're going to embrace the national part. We are going to cast a broader net of stewardship. We believe that through networking and other committed citizens, we will expand the conservation message and therefore have a more significant impact. We have energy, we have history, we have leadership, we have technology, as evidenced by this. I trust they're all there. So I would like to introduce somebody who inspires me. Smart, fast, creative, passionate. She loves riding her horse through the valley, is often found running up to the top of Windy Mountain, makes amazing sourdough bread, has a flock of chickens. She's a yoga instructor, inline skater, a Reiki practitioner. She hunts, fishes, and has a degree in economics from Columbia University. She has only 24 hours like the rest of us and is tireless. What really impresses me is she does all of this with grace. So I'm happy to introduce Sarah, our bridge to the future.
Way bad.
You guys rehearse that? I think Sarah must have paid her a lot of money for that.
No, that girl's cool. But bridge to the future, where do we start? It starts in the past. It starts with all of you who helped this center open its doors 30 years ago. And if somebody were to stop me on the street and ask what I'm most proud of in my tenure with the organization for a little over the past 2 years, It's the deep relationships that I've been able to form with many of you who have dedicated your lives to wild sheep, to love for the Wind River Valley, and a future for conservation. So with that, today we have a tip-top board and staff. So I'd ask the board to stand, who's able to join us today. Carolyn, Steve, and Pat. Not with us today is Al Garrett, Ryan Brock, who's based out of Reno, and Kate Falco. I'd also like to thank my staff who's made this all possible. So Shayla and Garrett, please. These guys are simply amazing and make processes seamless, and we're really, really glad to have them on the team. A few of the things that I'd like to touch on today are what we're doing to address our mission. What are our objectives for 2023, and to give an update on the very, very exciting Beck Learning Center. Just so we're all grounded, the flow of topics will be my update. Then we'll go to Garrett here for an update on our Legacy Society. Michelle is going to take it over to talk about our membership program. Then we're going to go virtually for our friends from the University of Wyoming who couldn't make it out because of weather. And then we have our very own biologist from Game and Fish, Zach Gregory, who's going to give us an update on the Whiskey Mountain Plan. That's wonderful. On the next slide. So why are we all here? Our mission. Is there a way that we could get that? Perhaps if we, I don't know. Why are we here? Our mission, it's to provide education and outreach, the keyword national conservation of wild sheep, wildlife, and wildlands. How do we do it? It's okay, next slide. With a very strong board that is growing from a national perspective. We're the Bighorn Center. We're grounded in the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Herd, and you'll see most of the familiar faces on this page right here. We're based in Du Bois. We're growing national. We've invited Ryan Brock, who's the education coordinator with the National Wild Sheep Foundation, on our board, and he's really helping drive our outreach opportunities as well as our overall education program and curriculum. We've talked about our staff, they're wonderful. So by the numbers, admission. In the 2022 year, we had 4,000 visitors. Just in a staff of one full-time and everyone else is either part-time or seasonal. It's remarkable what is generated from this little organization. We launched the Wild Sheep webinar series. We tried to host monthly, but we do not host during the summer months or during sheep season. We had 8 webinars. If we were to count every program that one of the Sheep Center staff or board was involved in, it's over 70. And we have 300 members and over 2,000 constituency base. Outreach. So you can see where we're going. In 2016, my predecessor here, Sarah Domek, so fond of that young woman. The numbers talk for themselves. We're growing. It's an upward trajectory, and I'm excited to see us take this number very much in the future. Okay. When I first sat down with you guys in, I guess it was early 2021, I set 3 key priorities for the future. One is to increase organizational capacity. What that means is continue what we're doing by way of our mission, do it better. Well, let's be stronger, let's be faster. I set a goal for expanding partnerships. Conservation is a collaborative effort. We can't do this alone. And continue our legacy. A point that I'd like to talk about for each of these, expand partnerships. We have a very close partnership with Game and Fish. They let us continue to use the Whiskey Mountain Conservation Camp for Camp Bighorn, and in the past 2 years, the Photographer's Retreat. We're looking at the University of Wyoming for potential resources for our marketing program, graduate students that we're going to get involved with our mission. As far as continuing our legacy, Garrett Girona is on board here, who is helping to build out our Legacy Society. So individuals who are interested in including us in our estate plan. But what continue our legacy really means to me is, to my point that I mentioned earlier, identifying what were the original plans, what was the original vision for of our founding fathers. And how do we continue that? And that's to increase organizational capacity. We have the budget today to have 2 part-time staff year-round, as well as 2 full-time. So we're making progress. Next slide, please. To speak on that state and national partnership, I want my members to be grounded in an agreement we signed in 2018 with both the National Sheep Foundation and the Wyoming chapter. The Butlers, who are joining us today virtually, Gary and Joe, Tony and Scott, they seeded a partnership in 2018. They came to our organization and gave us a considerable seed fund and said, develop a legacy. We took that seed and developed the Conservation Education Fund. The income from that fund is used to drive the educational program so that we specifically support our national partner, the Wild Sheep Foundation, and our local chapter, the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation. What we've done by way of this partnership is we attend the Wild Sheep Foundation's Sheep Week in Reno, Nevada. This year, we reached over 18 children through their 3-day youth program. Excuse me. Glass of water.
How many was that? Just a little bit of attention.
What are your scores in math?
Economics. And as far as the Wyoming chapter goes, we go to their winter meeting, their summer meeting in June. And we really try to be lock in step with their mission so that they see us as a true partner to keep sheep and kids on the mountain. Steve, I'll add. I know you have something to add.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that some people that live here part-time, the Townsends, Butch and Kathy, we created a national youth conservation award. It was presented in Reno Wednesday night, and that young gal, Autumn, will be here with her family this summer sometime probably. So there's a national award that the Sheep Center is the legs behind it, with help from Ryan Brock, who's at national.
We'll go to the next slide. All right, wonderful. So
How, can you check and see if everybody can still hear?
yeah, let's do that, Garrett.
Can we-
Let's do a sound check.
So
Yeah, just
sound check real quick, everybody online. If you could please say something, tell us you can hear us, or write something in the text chat. I very much appreciate it.
Butlers can hear you, but it's best if you're closer to the mic.
Okay, okay.
I'll stay stationary. Thanks, Joe. All right. Our fiscal year runs the beginning of June through the end of May. 2021 to 2022 was the best year we saw so far. We had a surplus of 32,000, which is a good buffer as we move forward, going into a construction process. We received $48,000 in gifts, record year. That's when we didn't hold a bash. And we see our membership growing. So when you see that renewal envelope come out from Michela, it makes a difference. Even $30 for an individual membership, it's helping to keep our doors open, our lights on. So thank you. This year we had our bash, 2023 bash, it should be 2022. We grossed 70,000, again, a record. Our net would have been 60. However, we looked at the people who worked really hard to make that night possible. And we wanted to give them, financial token of gratitude. So what we budgeted, we agreed that it would make sense to spend a little extra out of our budget to say thank you to the people who made that night possible. As far as our endowment accounts going, I mentioned the Butler Conservation Education Fund. That continues to grow. Last year, we reported around 35,000. We continue to see contributions into that account. So thank you, Joe and Gary. We continue to look forward to that to be a key fundraising goal once we have our classroom constructed. We do have a fund with the Wyoming Community Foundation, which pays us a distribution each year that we use for our programs and operations. Next slide.
I think she acts like she wants to say something.
No, she's just listening.
But she undid her microphone so that she could talk. She unmuted it.
Is that Dita and John?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
We're here.
Good to see you.
I don't know, I was hoping where you didn't show.
Front and center. So again, I'd like to just call out the key partnerships that we are looking to expand. Wyoming Game and Fish, that partnership is critical. We are the inhabitants of their facility here. They let us use this facility on a no-charge basis. And it's critical that we are aligned by way of our mission and our outcomes. We work closely with the Forest Service, BLM, and the Wyoming Governor's Big Game License Coalition. They funded us $5,000 in the past 2 years. We again want to increase our partnerships with educational institutions, UW, CWC, and the overall Wyoming Department of Education. So 2023 objectives. You can see prior, we've had a presence in 15 counties. The goal for our education in this program is to reach each county in the state of Wyoming. We are leveraging the chapters and affiliates we have with the Wild Sheep Foundation across the nation to help us through that for our national expansion. All right. Any questions on that part of the presentation? Thank you. I'm going to have a seat. So with Dita and John online, it's wonderful to have Dita and John. Dita and John came to us and identified Charlie and Sue Beck to be the appropriate namesakes for this classroom. Charlie and Sue were pioneers of Trail Lake Road. They were educators. And what better people to honor for our classroom center, that they had values around both education, wild spaces, that we want to continue as we move forward. Thank you, Dita and John.
You're so welcome.
So where are we? Status. We have our plans. They've been licensed by a structural engineer out of Jackson. We've been working with Nelson Engineering. Currently, we've taken those plans and we're working with an electrical engineer who are doing the schematics for the electrical plans and mechanical plans, which includes plumbing. Good news is they will be done with those schematics, if all goes according to plan, by the end of February. We've been working with a planning consultant who's close friends and family, part of the Wyoming chapter, to help us understand the end-to-end construction process. He's been very helpful. Pat Pace has been very helpful in helping us to think about requirements, space, flow of movement, and understanding what is required and to put a bid together. Where are we by way of funding? We have close to $570,000 in what's total pledged and raised funds, but we're looking to have an additional, we still have kept our goal of 689 so that we can have an additional buffer for furnishings and technology to complete the project. I'd like to talk about the project scope. So overall, we're calling this construction project the Beck Learning Center, but there are 3 key areas of the scope. So the first is the 650 square foot classroom that will be on the west side of this building. And when we have our reception, I'll walk you out there. But right now we have a footprint. There's I guess a gravel footprint outside. We're going to double that. So that's close to double the room that we're in. So we can have a very successful annual meeting once we double that, if we were to double this space. For those who are virtual right now, we're tight. It's we're rubbing elbows in the Ron Ball Gallery. What other important, so we have the classroom, the 650 square feet on the west. We're going to be squaring off the east side of the building. So on the northeast side, we're going to have increased office space and increased gift shop space. On the southeast side, we're going to have increased bathroom space, more storage, and create a kitchenette. Right now, we don't have any facilities for catering. We have to fill our carafes with the water fountain. So this will be a way that we can increase our capacity to host events and programs for the community. Other important things this project will include that will help for the operational efficiency of our organization and mission. We are looking to install ceiling fans in the main exhibit hall. We have very high ceilings, and heat rises. So by the installation of those fans, we hope to reduce the cost to heat the building during the winter. Right now, our parking lots, they're out of service. So the electrical engineers are taking a look at that. So this way we're all bright during the evenings. Solar panels at this point in time are not in scope. We will also be taking a non-structural redesign of existing closet space. So right here and what's behind you, and existing office space so that staff can work in better quarters and or not. So there's a separation between the gift shop and museum and staff working quarters. Groundbreaking. We're gearing towards groundbreaking this summer. Bid packets, so our timeline moving forward is our bid packets will be due by the end of March or early April, assuming that the electrical engineers come through with their end of February deliverable. We hope to have the bid closed and contracted by mid-April. So we're moving forward. Considerations. We will close the museum for a period of time. It will be closed mostly during the exterior construction phase. Hi, Brian, welcome. And some interior construction phase. However, for our 30th birthday, which is July 3rd, we will be open. And then after, depending, we will work with our contractor to have limited closures. For example, we may choose to be closed on Thursdays or Fridays so that the contractor is minimally disrupted by guests as we move forward. Next slide. Okay, this is an overview of the West Side Beck Learning Center. So 650 square feet. On this west wall here, we'll have a screen much bigger than this. And we're going to equip this room with state-of-the-art technology. So as we expand our membership nationally, we expand our board nationally, the experience, if you're sitting in a board meeting or attending a virtual event, it feels as though you're in the room with the speaker. We're going to have rearrangeable tables and chairs so that we can use the room for a variety of purposes. We want to have a board meeting or a classroom, or as the youth come in, hands-on activities. There will be a storage area on the north side of the room. So north is the highway, so that we can push those tables and chairs so they're not in the way when we have those more hands-on interactive events. Thank you, Garrett. Okay, increased office space. So this is the northeast corner to our right. We will be breaking this existing office into 2 separate 7x10 workspaces. The new office will be in this corner. And Carol and I did the measurements. They didn't make it into this slide, but we'll get that to you. We'll send this out and make sure the measurement for the new office is available to you. And there will be a portion of that square off here dedicated to a kids corner in our gift shop. Our gift shop this past summer, we've grossed close to $40,000. So this is a huge revenue stream. So by putting in this additional gift shop space, especially dedicated to youth and education, we see those numbers really going up in the future. Next slide. Southeast. So storage is very critical for our operations. During bash planning, we collect all the items for our silent auction, for our live auction. We have many hands-on touch materials for our education program and crafts. So this right corner will be dedicated to storage. We have a kitchenette that will allow us to better cater to our groups. And you can see we'll be installing an additional stall in the women's restroom, as well as one in the men's bathroom.
Doubling the capacity.
Thank you, Patrick. So we have 3 individuals or 3 companies lined up to put their bids in that we know are interested. key points, this will be a fixed price contract. We did receive budget numbers from various construction companies, so we feel like we are in line with what we have budgeted for as an organization for this project. So this way we do not run into a similar situation that we did in 2000 and I guess it was 18. This project will be performance bonded. All right, wonderful. So I'll stop there before we go to education program and ask individuals in the room or virtually if there's any questions. Yes, Michelle.
Of those 3 individuals, are they going to be available?
Well, we're going to ask them to put their bid in. They're aware of the project.
And they're aware of your time frame.
Yes, ma'am. Good question. And there are a few other, after I've been socializing these materials with people in the local community, that list is growing. So if you know anybody who would be interested in this project, do share their contact information with me. Questions? We don't have a date for groundbreaking yet, but okay. So again, we ask, going back to our mission, why are we doing what we're doing? This new space allows for increased capacity for education programming. And our education programs go on a spectrum of what is both local and to the national arena. For 2023, we're focusing on youth. Youth education has been identified as the key area of interest and focus through our strategic plan. With that, we've taken a look at Camp Bighorn, and we have space for 30 youth ages 9 through 12 to be hosted at Camp Bighorn this summer. We will have an education program in each county in Wyoming in 2023. We're working with the local school district to develop an internship program for high school students. What's great about this facility here is we're wildlife based, but we can also offer a high school student a business opportunity in our gift shop, fundraising and membership development, as well as museum management. The school is very interested to see that get launched late this year or early next. We continue with our national webinar series. So the second Thursday of every month, we invite an expert that is plugged into national sheep issues to come in and present on topics. The next one will be March 9th with Clint Epps. And I'll have to check if it's March 9th with Clint Epps on the genetics around wild sheep. And it's followed by Carson Butler out of Grand Teton National Park. We'll be discussing how that high level genetics that Clint will talk about has actually influenced his management practice in Grand Teton. So we're developing a momentum with the topics in the webinar series. And where are we going? We're grounded in what's local, but we look to use our chapters and affiliates of the Wild Sheep Foundation to share our message, which is science-based and around all subspecies of wild sheep. Any questions? Okay, with that, I'll give it to Garrett. Else trade responsible.
All right, so I am Garrett Gerona, working with the National Bighorn Sheep Center. I am at the head of the Legacy Society, which is a program we are developing for our lifelong conservationists. So, our legacy, basically the way our Legacy Society works is someone who's been conserving for a long time, invested in the environment, invested in the community. They want to see their life's efforts, their values carried on into the future. But times are changing and it's a bit frightening. So what we do is when you include us in your estate plan, we watch out for your assets, we carry them into the future, and we incorporate what you contribute into our programs. And I'm of the mind viewing the Legacy Society more as a service for conservationists or viewing it as a service first and foremost, will help us create a superior system, perform better work, and improve our organization further in the long run. You don't have to, when you commit to us, you don't have to worry about distracted lawyers or changing legislation. We have you back. We are guarding your wishes for decades. So you have an active team taking care of everything for you. And we want to thank our 4 current members, Tori and Meredith Taylor, and Mary Turney and Rick Liqui. They're terrific. Thank you. So, service. Legacy Society provides a service for lifelong conservationists, and we take a hands-on approach in upholding your legacy, which we discussed. When you commit to us, we commit to you. If you want something done, we get it done. If you have a particular concern about conservation, we focus everything on that. If you want something done, we get it done. For instance, Tori and Meredith Taylor's Conservation Library, that's a bit of a recent development. So there are founding Legacy Society members, and in addition to the easement they've included on their property, they reached out to us and expressed interest in our hosting their conservation library. They maintain a library, hunting, fishing, conservation, of over 400 books. And our objective, based on their wishes, is to make their library accessible as a reference library for future conservationists. So 70 years from now, conservationist wants to look up information about our time or just wants an educational resource, they have it because we're taking care of it. So how it works is it's very simple. So you contact us with your decision to include the center in your estate plan. You want us to steward something for you for the future. So then we recommend you a trusted estate planning attorney. We don't have one yet. We are looking into developing a connection with a estate planning attorney we can trust. So,
And right now, we do have access to the Wyoming Community Foundation's team, if need be.
yes. And if anybody knows anyone who would be up for the job, is interested in this in the long term, please let us know. So then we meet with you, discuss your contribution and wishes, and then we work together with you to develop a plan on how best to use your contribution according to your wishes. As with Tori and Meredith's library, so can we with anything you want. If there's anything you want done when you commit to us, again, we commit to you. We get it done. We make sure this gets carried decades into the future. And then we honor you, share your story, and take care of you as best we can. Meaning, one of the things we're starting is Legacy Society interviews. So discussing the lives and efforts of our members. Yesterday, we completed our first Legacy Society interview with Tori and Meredith Taylor. That's getting edited right now and will be available online soon. Shares their life story. We want you to feel appreciated. And we hope when future conservationists hear your story, they're inspired to conserve as well. So it's a mixture of taking care of you and making sure you're appreciated and spreading your values or handing your values down. That's what we're going for. And we also hold an annual banquet for our Legacy Society members. So if you like eating, that's available. Recent developments, we just discussed the interview, the book collection, and more interviews are planned. So we are planning interviews with Mary and Rick, planning interviews with not just about their conservation efforts, but also history in the community, the Beck Learning Center. Tori and Meredith knew the Becks personally. And when you make a building or when you dedicate a building to someone, you don't want just their name attached to it. You want their stories attached to it. So we're going to work with the Taylors to ensure the Beck's story, personal story, gets attached to the center. So we're thanking them for that. And we're interested in doing similar sorts of things. So if there's any history involved in the center, again, please let us know. we're interested in conserving history as well as the environment.
And thank you, Garrett. That's a very, very important point around the Beck Learning Center. For, I think a few people in this room, and I know especially Dita and John, they're very familiar with the Beck. So we will be developing a specific committee to help honor Charlie and Sue Beck and their legacy for the classroom. But we've already started
Yeah.
through
yeah.
Garrett's initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So for future updates, please check our website, subscribe to our mailing list, just come in and see us and we'll keep you up to date. Thank you.
I'll introduce Ms. Shayla to speak on our membership program.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Kleeman, and I'm the new office and gift shop administrator. I've also taken the task of rebuilding and managing all of our memberships. Currently, right now, we have a little over 300 members. And our current benefits include free admission to the center along with all of our events and 10% off anything in our gift shop. For our patron members, we have 2 dinner tickets for the Bighorn Bash annual fundraiser. And then for our Summit Membership Club, a free guided wildlife tour for 2 members and up to 4 guests. And then for our benefactor members, we have a free wildlife viewing tour for 2 members, up to 4 guests, and then a catered lunch plus 2 dinner tickets for the Bighorn Bash. Currently, I am working on revamping our membership program. I have yet to run it by the board and get their approval because there's a few little things I want to iron out. But we're working on bringing in a life membership and some more incentives to just bring people into the center and reach people outside of town. I'm really excited to be here and I'm really excited to be working on this. It's something that I have kind of always wanted to do. I've always wanted to be a part of an organization that has a meaning, and I'm just really happy to be here. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. What about the existing life members? So,
We're gonna integrate all of that in together. Yep, so with our existing life members, I believe we have 6 right now. We're going to thank them for that and give them all of the new little incentives and ideas that we have around them. Anything else? No? Okay. Thank you.
Next we go to our virtual friends, Laramie, Rachel and Jack.
Okay.
And I'll share their screen.
Okay. So that's your. Okay, perfect.
That's what's up.
Are we in the line?
Are our friends presenting here?
Rachel and Jack?
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, we can. Cool. Can everyone in the room? Okay, perfect. Yes, we all can hear you.
Perfect. All right, I wish we were all with you, but the roads are closed, so glad we could do this virtually anyway.
Please screen share.
Well, great. My name is Jack Gavin. I'm glad to finally meet most of you, at least virtually. Like Rachel said,
They're right there in the bottom right.
But they're supposed to share their presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I'll stop sharing our screen and then they can share theirs. All right, perfect. Thank you.
Can you all see our slides now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, like I was saying, my name is Jack Gavin. I'm excited to virtually meet you all. Again, I really wish we could be there. But I know this summer when I'm in town, I'm sure I will make it through the center and meet all of you, and I'm very excited for that. So today I'm gonna just provide like a little brief overview of our project. Although a lot of you know what we do, I'll give you an update on kind of where we're at and some of our steps for the future. And Rachel will talk about some of our recently completed work, her work, and Brittany Wagler's recently finished master's thesis. So before I get going, I just want to introduce the team. Like I said, my name is Jack. I'm a new master's student with the Monteith Shop. Rachel is the PhD student on the project. Brittany Wagler is a former master's student, and she is now a research scientist with the Monteith Shop. And Dr. Kevin Monteith is our advisor and helps us run the show. And I also want to shout out Wyoming Game and Fish Department. the work that we do really couldn't be done without them and their partnership, not even just here in the Whiskey Mountain, but all the areas we work. They are great collaborators. And before I go into, I just want to thank all of our supporters, all of our collaborators. Again, this work is truly a collaborative effort. It could not be done without the help of everyone. So thank you so much. So to get going here, these arrows point to the sheep herds where we have collared sheep and where we do our research. And as many of you guys know, sort of the crux of sheep management in North America is managing herds that are chronically infected. And so the sheep herds that we study are all chronically infected, and they all have all 5 pathogens associated with pneumonia in them. And what's unique about this situation is that although the pathogens are present in all of the sheep herds, they all don't deal with pneumonia the same way. And so like our Jackson sheep, for example, they have seen historic pneumonia die-offs, and then they see subsequent population recoveries, while the whiskey herd sort of has never been able to recover fully from when pneumonia was introduced into the population. And so this provides a really unique opportunity for us to investigate this prevailing question that affects, all North American sheep herds. Why are some sheep herds able to deal with pneumonia, able to contend with it, and why aren't some? And so now we want to look into this question, and I'll talk a bit about how we investigate it. So the bulk of our work kind of functions around this biannual captures that we do, and this allows us to monitor many of these things listed. Notable for bighorn sheep is our disease prevalence work and the fat measurements that we get. Fat is the basis for a ton of our work, and Rachel will go into that more today. We do biannual captures, so we're able to get the status of the sheep as they come off of their summer range, as well as the status of the sheep as they come off of winter range. We're no longer catching lambs in the whiskey herd, but we are catching lambs in Jackson, and we are catching lambs just on the other side of the crest of the winds, on the west side out of Pinedale. But the lambing work that we did do in the Whiskey Mountain herd provided some really great information, and we noticed some cool, unique patterns in the lambs that we weren't seeing in some of the other herds. And so our captures and associated data that we collect allow us to track how individuals fare throughout time. But there are many factors that influence an individual and therefore how the sheep perform at a population level. And at the foundational level, nutrition is paramount. Animals need to make a living sort of day in and day out, and acquiring food resources is how they do that. And so that is why nutrition has been such an important part of our work up to this point. Understanding how nutrition influences sheep sort of helps us further investigate some of the other interacting factors that also influence sheep. And so this focus on nutrition has led the crew to do a ton of veg transects. Over the past 3 seasons, Brittany, Rachel, and a whole host of technicians have conducted 768 veg transects. I'm sure Rachel is very happy that that part of the project is over. It's super tedious work. They ID plants down to the species level. They collect clippings for lab analysis. And this has just provided a tremendous wealth of data that Rachel is going to talk about now.
All right, so I'm going to present a lot of results, both from the work I'm doing for my degree and then the work that Brittany recently just completed as part of her master's. The bulk of Brittany's work really focused on these vegetation transects, where we were really digging into the habitat that sheep in both the Jackson and Whiskey herd were living in the summer, and trying to really get a comparison of their habitats. This picture, or these 2 pictures, give a good idea of kind of what we were dealing with and what we were seeing while we were out there doing the vegetation transects. In the Jackson herd, you can see some tall forbs and pretty good coverage on the ground, where some of the areas in the Whiskey herd, I think this is the top of Downs Mountain, we're really seeing really short alpine vegetation, not these tall forbs like we were seeing at Jackson. So that's all anecdotal, but Brittany sent in all of the samples and did a lot of analysis on the data we collected in the summer, and overall really saw a huge difference in the Jackson and Whiskey herds, and it all had to do with how much forage was available to sheep in these herds. So by and large, Jackson sheep just had more species in their habitats, more plant cover, and almost 2 times as much biomass in their home ranges than they did in the Whiskey Mountain home ranges. And so we also broke it down into micro and macronutrients. So we looked at the energy, protein, and a whole bunch of minerals available to these sheep. And again, by and large, Jackson just had much more available, many more nutrients available to them. Selenium limitation has been a big focus and proposed as a potential issue in the Whiskey Mountain herd. And we were measuring the amount of selenium available in the plants and didn't find any difference in the Jackson and Whiskey herd. So it's likely not a limitation in any specific nutrient or mineral to these sheep. It's just a limitation in the sheer amount of plants available for these sheep to eat. And so I kind of like to think of this and like to use the analogy of a faucet of energy income. So the amount of food these sheep that they have available to them and its influence on fat reserves. So how much are the sheep able to fill their buckets? How much fat are they able to accumulate throughout the summer? And so the Jackson sheep, that faucet is on full blast. They're able to accumulate a lot of energy and nutrients from their habitats and fill their buckets of fat reserves, while the Whiskey Mountain faucets are kind of trickling, not flowing quite as much. They're able to gain enough fat to get them through the winters and to survive, but are more limited in food than the Jackson herd. And a lot of you have probably seen this figure before, but this really supports what we saw when we capture the sheep every December and March. We're measuring literally how much fat reserves they have. And you can see the Whiskey sheep, the migratory portion of the Whiskey sheep that you all are so familiar with, are continuously gaining less fat over the summer. So when they come off of their summer range, they're just not in as good condition as the Jackson or the Upper Shoshone or Cody sheep that we're also studying. So again, we're just saying here that Jackson sheep are able to accumulate more fat reserves over the summer than those Whiskey sheep. And fat reserves are really important to sheep because it helps them finance reproduction, so raising lambs, and also survival. And these sheep need to gain a certain amount of fat reserves every summer that they could use over winters, especially like this one, to survive. So they really accumulate a lot of fat in the summer and then burn through those fat reserves in the winter. So there's a certain threshold that they need to get to in order to make it through both seasons. And the Jackson sheep are just having much more of a buffer. So they gain more fat and are further away from that threshold than those Whiskey sheep are. We've also found that reproduction is costly to those fat reserves. So you can think of that as a hole in the bucket. So raising a lamb is draining some of that energy. And we've seen it comes at about a 5 percentage point cost to fat gain over the summer. And so a lot of my work deals with what are some of those other holes in the buckets, or what are some of those other big energetic costs that these sheep are dealing with. I wanted to ask if the pathogens they're carrying come with energetic costs as well. So many of you know this, but every time we capture these sheep, we're testing them for 5 of the pathogens that are most commonly associated with pneumonia. We're testing for MOVI and then 4 other of those pathogens. And in all of the sheep in the herds that we study, they are carrying these pathogens, but oftentimes we think of the adults as not being affected by the pathogens at all. So they're rarely getting sick and almost never dying of pneumonia. It's mostly the lambs that are affected. So I looked into if these pathogens come with some energetic cost. And just to give you a relative reference point, remember we said raising a lamb over the summer costs adult sheep about 5 percentage points of fat gain over the summer. And so looking at the cost of just carrying a MOVI, the sheep doesn't have to be sick. She could have no symptoms of pneumonia, but carrying a MOVI over the summer costs about 3 percentage points of fat gain over the summer. And then each additional pathogen she's carrying has an additional 1.4 percentage point cost to fat gain. And so usually we think of raising a lamb as like the most energetically costly thing that they have to do. It takes a lot of their energy to raise the lamb, and through lactation, they're spending a lot of their energy. But what we've seen is that carrying a MOVI and just 2 other pathogens, which is pretty common in these sheep, have more of an energetic cost than raising that lamb. So we think of these pathogens as not having much of an effect on the adults, but it is draining a lot of their energy reserves. So back to our bucket analogy, these sheep are dealing with a lot of energetic costs while they're trying to accumulate fat reserves over the summer. So they're dealing with costs of raising lambs and all the added costs of carrying these pathogens. So the Jackson sheep have that extra buffer. They have plenty of fat reserves, so they can likely deal with all of these costs on top of each other and still be sure to have enough fat to get them through the winter. But the whiskey sheep don't have as big of a buffer. So even if they're carrying the same pathogens and the same amount of pathogens as the Jackson sheep, they just don't have that much extra fat reserves and may have to sacrifice reproduction in order to deal with all of these costs. So we know that the lambs in the whiskey herd are dying of pneumonia. That's what we've really learned from our lamb captures for the last 4 summers. The whiskey lambs die at a much higher rate of pneumonia than in any of the other herds. And so these pathogens are having a direct effect on the lambs, but they're probably also, the pathogens are costing the adults a lot of energy that they're then not able to put into raising a lamb. So the lambs are also suffering from a lack of energy invested into them to get them through the summer and able to survive. So a lot of you know we also started similar work where we're capturing and collaring the sheep in the west side of the Wind River Range. It's still a portion of the whiskey herd that seems to be doing a bit better. They're all high elevation residents that live around the Green River Lakes area. And we've seen that these sheep are gaining a ton of fat over the summer, which is probably really important to get them through harsh winters, living up at 10 or 11,000 feet. So we've been really impressed in seeing that the west side sheep are gaining a huge amount of fat and sometimes maintaining it throughout the winter and sometimes using up all of those fat reserves. So going back to the buckets, the west side whiskey sheep are really able to fill their buckets. They're reaching almost their physiological maximum of fat reserves, which is really impressive. And then again, anecdotally, we're doing the same vegetation surveys over on the west side, and it's just a huge difference. There's so many plants there, so many different species. So it makes a lot of sense of why those sheep are doing so well, because they just have tons of good food available to them. And so part of Brittany's master's also wanted to dig into the space use and behavior of moms in both the Jackson and whiskey herd. And a big result that she found is that when whiskey moms lost their lambs, so when their lamb died, they almost doubled their space use. So their home ranges got way bigger, and that was likely necessary for them to get the amount of food that they needed. But she didn't see the same pattern in the Jackson sheep. So they didn't change their space use when their lamb died. And it's probably because their home ranges had enough food and their lambs weren't limiting their movement to be able to get enough food. So again, that just supports that the whiskey sheep are likely nutritionally limited, and then having a lamb at heel might limit their ability to get as much food as they need. So this all leads to some questions about behavior, space use, and how they influence disease dynamics in these sheep. And Jack is going to talk about some of our future work.
Yeah, so like Rachel was just saying, that work that Brittany did really started us thinking about behavior, animal space use, animal movement, how maybe pneumonia and having a lamb or not having a lamb affects those things. So our next step is to investigate sheep behavior, particularly around their sociality, their group dynamics, and how that might affect the spread of pneumonia. And so sheep are gregarious animals, and they form social groups that vary through structure throughout the year. Kind of up in that left corner, we have your classic group of a mix of ewes and young rams, but we also have nursery groups, and we also have bachelor groups. These bachelor groups remain pretty elusive. It's hard to get collars on rams, and they're just really dang hard to find up in the mountains. But they become less elusive during the rut when both sexes of animals are coming together. And so each of these social groups could have a unique impact on the spread of pneumonia. For example, we know that a lamb can die of pneumonia even if its mom wasn't positive. And so was that because there was another ewe who was pneumonia positive within the nursery group? Is there sort of movement between groups where an infected ewe is coming in, or is it happening at another time of year? These are all really interesting questions, and we're excited to look at them in the future. Even though we're not catching lambs out of DuBois anymore, we are going to be back this summer up in the mountains with spotting scopes and binoculars, looking at the whiskey sheep, which I'm really excited for. So yeah, like I said, we have some really great questions to dig into. We have a lot of data to collect. The data that we're going to be collecting from here on out is going to be group dynamic data and behavioral observations. So we're going to be spending a lot of time in the mountains in the summer, glassing up sheep, and hopefully we won't be falling asleep on the job like my buddy Sam there. Yeah, so again, I just want to thank you all so much for giving us the time to chat. I'm really happy to speak for the first time, and I can't wait to meet everyone. And at that, do we have any questions?
Michelle?
Kathy Trainer put a question on that, that's my exact question.
Okay, so let's check that then. Right. Ms. Trainer asks, any ideas why less forage for whiskey habitat now versus before 1990s, which supported a large, robust herd and historically massive herds?
Oh, good.
Yeah, this is a question we've got for the entirety of the project, and it's kind of like a good question. We don't know, but some of the work I talked about with that energetic costs of pathogens, the food available to the sheep may have been enough if they didn't have that added energetic cost. But with the cost of just carrying these pathogens, they may not be able to support that extra added cost with the amount of forage available. So there actually may not be a difference in the amount of forage available, but just the energetic costs that these sheep are incurring may mean that now it's insufficient.
Other questions? Steve?
Could you address pregnancy rates in Whiskey, Jackson, and maybe Cody, and maybe even throughout the West? And how does whiskey compare?
Yeah, if I heard right, Steve asked about pregnancy rates, and we see high pregnancy rates in all of the 3 or 4 herds that we're studying that are about similar to those in all of the West. So generally a normal pregnancy rate in a population is about 90%, which is what we're seeing in the whiskey herd. So the problem isn't getting pregnant. The ewes are getting pregnant. The problem is just after they give birth, they're losing their lambs at really high rates here in the whiskey herd.
Other questions?
Have there been any studies on the Absaroka, the ones on the other side of the highway?
Microphone.
We can ask.
Oh, okay.
This question's from Michelle Burdick. Have there been any studies on the Absaroka herd north of the highway?
Yeah, so we are working in the Absaroka herd, not directly north of DuBois, but more in the Cody area on the north and south fork of the Shoshone. So we're doing the biannual captures there, and they're showing similar dynamics. They have higher recruitment rates, so they raise more lambs, high pregnancy rates, but they are gaining more fat than these whiskey sheep. We aren't doing the lamb work there, so we can't tell you about cause-specific mortality of those sheep. But yeah, we aren't studying the Badlands sheep. So we don't know much about those ones directly north of you guys in DuBois.
Hey guys, just to jump in for a second, do we know if there's any opportunity for habitat improvement for the whiskey sheep to produce, more forage, more food for them? Is that something that's even on the table? Is it possible, or is that something that is just too big an ask because of competing species and the like?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And we started out this project, we hope to kind of address that. And we actually back in 2019 and 2020 attempted to do really small scale burns up there. We were up on Goat Flat with a torch, kind of trying to see if we could do small burns to help the alpine habitat up there. The vegetation there just doesn't really burn. So that's not really a possibility. And also it's wilderness area, so getting permission to do habitat treatments up on Summer Range is very unlikely. But there has been a lot of work on Winter Range, so tons of habitat treatments by Game and Fish and collaborators to help support their Winter Range. And I think our results show that Summer Range is really the problem nutritionally for them, but that means that having a good winter range is really critical for these sheep, because if they had a bad summer range and a bad winter range, they probably couldn't make it. But because their winter range is pretty good, that's what's keeping these adults alive and keeping that herd going so far. So while summer range is probably the main problem, maintaining a really good winter range is really good for them too.
Robert had a question.
Yeah, when I got into this study 4 years ago, spent some time up Trail Lake Road, I came across a study that the habitat biologist Jerry Butler had done in 1978. And I remember reading it, and I don't have access to a copy now, so I'm going on memory, but the one thing that stood out in that study that he did in 78 was that he was projecting the carrying capacity for the whiskey herd to be half of what the objective was. And I believe the objective used to be 1320. And he was saying it was really more somewhere between 600 and 700 sheep. And as I said, I don't remember the details of that study. I'm just wondering if you guys have access to that study. And if you looked at it, and there's any data out of that study that would be helpful to what you're doing now.
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but I think kind of with what we're seeing on nutritional availability that supports that, 2,000 sheep like they used to have maybe can't be supported right now. We have lab mates also working on carrying capacity in some Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep in California. So that won't tell us specifically about the whiskey range carrying capacity, but could help us do something similar here, seeing what could this range really support.
Another question?
Gary's on the line, but I think his study addressed winter range carrying capacity, and these folks are looking at summer range. I think it's apples and oranges, but Gary could correct me if he wishes to. But I think most of his work was done on the winter ranges, because in those days, we thought winter range was the bottleneck for most populations. Today, these young folks are making us think a little harder, saying summer range may be the bottleneck, especially in this situation. So it may not be reliable to compare them. But Gary can comment if he wishes.
Gary?
Are you good?
Question for Meredith then?
I have a comment.
Comment.
Since we're talking about Gary Butler's study, I was here at that time as well, studying the sheep, and I was very concerned about habitat.
Could we get you to stand up closer to the mic, Meredith?
I was very concerned about some of the habitat improvement projects that were
I think I can't hear anything now.
Okay.
I didn't
There we
touch it.
go. Yeah,
There we go.
turned on.
Pam did it.
Okay, start over again. I was here during that period in the 70s, working on the sheep, and I was concerned about some of the habitat improvement projects, they were called, on Whiskey Mountain, particularly spraying of what was called weeds. And that was Torrey Rim, the east side of Whiskey, and pitting projects where little divots were made on Windy and over toward the east side. So I'm concerned when you say the comparison between East and West Whiskey, that those projects had an impact larger than we even expected. I was not a fan of them even at the time, and now I see that they could have long-reaching effects on the sheep habitat.
Thank you so much.
Did you get that? Did you hear that?
Yeah, I guess I'm not as familiar with the habitat treatments that were done back then, but would be interested to hear more about them and if the goals were to improve habitat for sheep.
Well, those were on winter range. Those treatments. The spraying was to try and get at the mat formers to improve grasses on the winter range. And the pitting was to try and capture some moisture in those divots from snow that allow the grass seeds that were blowing around to have some place to catch. The pitting they did alongside the road up to Torrey Rim ended up being even a better deterrent from people trying to drive off the road. I was in a Suburban with Wilford.
What I heard,
Some of the group
the Badlands herd and the whiskey herd don't intermingle.
No, they don't.
They had tried to drive their Suburbans off the road because they kept sliding on the road, the main road. And I looked over and watched those people bounce around in that Suburban like popcorn. And he had Wilford was trying to drive it and he drove it back down. So it was a good deterrent to keep people on the actual road.
Real quickly, some of the early results, and again, Gary's on the line, but some of the early results were double to triple the forage production of grasses in those pitting areas, as well as the sprayed areas. Meredith, I'm not too excited about sprays in general either. I don't know what the long-term effects are, but I challenge anyone to go up there today and look at those pitting sites and tell me there's less grass, which is what the sheep are selecting for in the winter in the range pitting sites versus the unpitted sites. I'd also encourage you to go up to Denison Mountain where Butler pitted several hundred acres and look at the grass production there. Matter of fact, if you look on Google Earth, you can see an increase in grass production from Google Earth. And that's why we still have sheep on Denison, and that's why elk are really concentrated on those areas too. So it's my goal, if I live long enough and get enough energy, to at least go to the East Fork ones up at Denison Mountain. And now we probably ought to look at the whiskey ones too. And maybe Game and Fish, maybe Amy's on the line, maybe they have clipped lately in and outside of the pitted areas. I'm amazed that today you can see the difference from space on Denison Mountain and watch the animals use it. Just go up there right now, or can't now, but right before they close it and early in the spring and see where the sheep and elk are. They're still using 30-year-old pits.
So we have a question in the text chat from Lori Cabbage. Any feedback on the removal of the chronic carrier ewe that was removed near the Red Rocks?
And Zach Gregory, who's up next, will
Yeah.
address that.
Okay. Oh, that's what he was talking about.
Thank
Sorry.
you. No,
Sorry.
wonderful.
Okay. Any other questions? Going once, going
I might
twice.
just add a quick comment. I know Zach can help me out, but some of the later clippings the last few years on winter range, which isn't summer range now, but shows some of the lower levels of use that you had for lots of years. Is that accurate, Zach?
I wouldn't know.
Okay, I'm pretty sure that's what your boss Daryl was telling me.
Yeah.
Just not, of course, the sheep, there isn't 1,000 head of sheep or 2,000 or whatever was there. So use is really low. So again, abundant forage on winter range, but something must be going on summer range to predispose these ewes that are carrying 5 pathogens and they just can't seem to deal with it.
Yeah, and I can't say the specific utilization rates or anything, but there's never been an issue of overutilization. There's plenty of forage.
Well, recently.
Right, yeah.
They established those transects to help with the transplant formula. To determine whether we had too many sheep, we could remove sheep after the winter time when we looked at what was utilized, what was produced. We did the math on that. So it was a tool to use, but there was some Well, we had set a goal of 65% utilization. We had some higher ones during the time, just prior to the die-off.
I remember some 80% roughly utilization levels on winter range with 2,000 plus acres.
But they haven't been, when I was clipping those transects in the early 2000s, we had a pretty good production. And very little use.
So is that all for the questions?
Are there ever any reseeding projects going on? Did you see the winter range or the summer range?
This question's from Joan Timchek. Is there ever any reseeding projects going on?
I think Game and Fish is really doing a lot of the habitat treatment work. So I'm not familiar with exactly what's going on for habitat treatments. Zach might know better.
Yeah, Mark might be able to speak.
Well, I can just mention the most recent one was the big meadow up at the end of the Trail Lake Road where they burned, then they did a herbicide treatment against certain grass species that they didn't want. And then I thought the next step was to seed it.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that further, but as far as historical seeding, I'm not sure. if they
Like bunch
have.
grasses, maybe up high.
I don't know if they did.
Not apply, just the big meadow.
Yeah.
They've been battling basin wild rye.
In the meadow there, yeah.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Jack. That presentation was very informative. A question I have is, what were you most surprised about? Was the data that you found contradictory to anything that you initially hypothesized?
Yeah. I think a couple of things so far. I think we didn't really expect to see like the pathogens coming at that much of an energetic cost. The normal thought around adults carrying those pathogens is that it has almost no effect on them. So seeing that they come at such huge energetic costs really supports that there's probably trade-offs there with raising lambs and dealing with those pathogens. Another thing we were surprised about was just how fat the sheep on the west side are. It's hard to imagine how sheep live at high elevation all year, especially in bad winters like this. So it kind of makes sense that they're getting that fat, but it's just nearly the fattest sheep that have ever been seen throughout their range. So cool to see that those ones are really doing something different. So putting on nearly as much fat as possible to survive. That's pretty cool. I think, Jack, is there anything?
Just sort of again on these west side whiskey sheep, we've been looking at their points from the collars and they really just like hunker down in the winter. I mean, you can imagine what it's like up there at 11,000 feet, and those suckers just don't move. They bed down under cliffs, they make little forays to go, and then they come back and sit right back down, which is again a pretty unique thing that we're seeing. So
Thank you. And last question I have for you guys is, so out of the University of Wyoming, but your research is impactful. Could you share a little bit about how you work with other universities, not in Wyoming, or other agencies not in this state?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, we have part of our lab is working with California and the Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep, and they have an incredible long-term study looking at bighorn sheep. And so we're partnering with them, and a lot of what we learn helps them out, and what they learn helps us out too. So that's been great. There's a lot of nationwide test and call workshops going on that we're participating in, talking to managers throughout the country and Canada to learn from them of how we can help with learning about the whiskey herd, or Zach will talk about the test and call, but implementing that here.
Thank you. I wanted to highlight how it's really a national network of scientists and researchers like yourself. So thank you for the collaboration and work you're doing. And at the National Bighorn Sheep Center, if you have interesting findings, we love to help get that message out. So thank you guys for coming today. It means a lot to us.
Sarah,
Yeah, thank you so much for your support.
yeah, right here in Lander, Game and Fish, right here, talk about a national connection, a perspective. Right here in Lander, Game and Fish Wildlife Coordinator, who works with Zach and Brian, Daryl Lutz is, what is he, the sole chair or is he co-chair? Sole chair of the WAFWA, Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, Bighorn Sheep Working Group. So all the fish and wildlife state agencies in the West, and Daryl is lead of that. So information that's found out here goes to other states. Daryl is certainly listening to other states, and what he learns there comes here. We're really fortunate, but really lucky to have that caliber of personnel in Wyoming Game and Fish. That's a pretty prestigious position in my mind.
Agree. Thank you, Steve. All right, with that, thank you guys. And we can pass the mic to Zach Gregory, literally.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And Zach, if you come up here this way, our virtual participants can see you.
You gotta keep an eye on my swag bag there.
And you can just cue to Garrett and then we can change your slides.
Sure. Well, thanks for everybody for having me. Happy to be here. I apologize in advance. My slides are not very creative, so try to bear with me. Okay, go to the next one. Okay. So this is just kind of a broad update with the Whiskey Basin Plan. Just kind of the highlights that we've hit in the last year. So we'll start with the vegetation. We have, would you like me to hold that?
Yeah, I think it's a little hard for here, so I wouldn't mind.
We started, so the Red Creek, everyone's familiar with the bridge at Red Creek. There's, several years ago, the thought with those sheep, why they're on the road partly is they don't have access to the water there. And they do move back and forth through there, not across the highway, but in Little Red Creek. And there's just a barrier of willows and it's just kind of a bad habitat location place. Anyway, we been working with the tribes, and because it's reservation land, and we was able to get a hold of a skid steer with a masticator on it, and we've been we were really cruising. We had our Habitat and Access folks got in that and was mowing willows like crazy, and then we had a breakdown. But we did, for the amount of time they've been in that, they've done some, and I got some before and after photos here. So anyway, that's began, and hopefully will be finished up here as soon as they can get the equipment back up and running. And also along with that, there's the Russian knapweed is terrible in there, and it was incredibly thick. And so we worked with the Fremont County Weed and Pests, and they sprayed it this late summer, fall.
Can you sit in that chair so that people out there can see you?
Sure.
Right,
You see me?
Sarah? If he sits where Garrett sits. No.
I don't know if anybody wants to see me. Do they?
Yes, I'd love to see you. Or is there a way to do that?
I should have to show the speed. Let's see. So
Here he is. Here he is.
Oh, great.
There we go.
He's a star.
Yeah, there we go.
And if I don't your name is Sarah.
No, I don't. Yeah, I'm not Sarah.
The technology is better than last year.
It'll be better next year.
Only
up from here.
Could you talk about the Red Creek Bridge and what the work was done by the highway department recently? Where exactly you were working?
That's us. That's us mowing all the willows. Yep.
But the highway too.
Oh, with the bridge?
By YDOT, yes.
I'm not sure what they were doing, just
And
repairing.
the sheep get underneath.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's clear. So we did. So we cleared both sides of the bridge. They have not been under there at all. And it's actually underneath the bridge. There's not a lot of vegetation. it's fairly open. It was just choked off on both sides of the bridge. And that's where we've been able to get with our skid steer. Yep.
Can they access water?
Yeah, yep, and I'll show you photos, and we're gonna continue on. Like I said, we've had some mechanical problems, but the plan is to go upstream from the bridge and open up some spring areas that they can access without come down. And also, like I said, they do cross in that draw from those big ridge tops or those big buttes that go back and forth. And it is a pretty, I've had to walk through there several times, and it's really tight to get through, even, you know, for a human. And for sheep, I imagine it's very difficult for them because they can't see anything. But anyway, so the Russian knapweed is just, it's incredibly infested in there. And Fremont County Weed and Pest have sprayed this year, and we have plans to spray again because I'm sure there's quite the seed bed in there. But anyway, that's taken off, and we were moving good, and yeah, we'll continue with that. You can go to the next slide, and there'll be a few before and after photos. So this is on the bridge, kind of looking back to the west or the northwest. This is Little Red Creek. So this is before, go ahead. And then this is just after. This was just like one day of mowing, which is unfortunate that we had the breakdown, because they would have had the whole thing done probably in a week. Yeah, go ahead.
Are there plans to continue because willows will grow sprout?
Yeah. So that I didn't. Yeah. So we've talked with several folks with the Weed and Pest, and the reason, so it's better. The new chemical they use for willows is it's better to spray as the leaves are turning yellow, because they'll suck the chemical in. And so that was kind of what we wanted to, but we didn't want to wait because we had a lot of momentum with the equipment and the tribes, and we were really going. And it was cold and frozen, and with the way this was seeping, we didn't really want to make a huge mess with ruts and wrecking a lot of the riparian areas. So we thought in the middle of winter, being frozen, maybe a little more solid. And but the plan is to go back and spray this next year, spray all the willows.
We've been trying to do this for probably 6 or 8 years, but with all the jurisdictional issues of the tribes and whatnot, it just really fell into place, and it's like we're doing it while we can.
Yep. But yeah, the plan is to spray, because they'll grow several feet in ones.
Where's the Russian knapweed at?
It's kind of all along here. Like the road goes right here, and just driving on the road, you'll see where there's not willows and sagebrush, it's knapweed.
It's kind of a basin up and around the corner to the left.
And it's thick in there, so.
We'll be excavating to spread that further.
There's not a lot down here. It's mostly in a little drier up off the river bottom, out of the willows, and yeah, it may, but we're going to continue to spray. So we're not going to come in and do it and leave, because it will spread, but we're going to continue spraying, especially knapweed for a long time. Especially being close to a water source. I mean, there's chance to spread a lot of seed. So, okay, yep. Yeah, and this is just looking upstream from the bridge again, and yeah, before and after. Okay, next one. And this is the other side. So he got what he could. And again, I think they'll be going back to touch up some stuff once we get the equipment back. But I mean, all this it was like a day, and we were just, oh man, finally had it, and it was going smooth, and we had a breakdown. But anyway, yeah, they're just waiting on parts right now. So hopefully they'll have a whip soon. Okay. So some more habitat projects. Folks are familiar with the Torrey Rim prescribed burn. That's a go. All of the trees that they fell, they're all cured. They think they can get a good burn right now. And the forest has been awesome with this. This is a huge lift on this, but this is a really big deal for them to be able to do this. Those guys have been awesome. And so, but the plan now is just we could burn in the spring or the fall. It's just going to depend on conditions, the safest conditions. So they'll be monitoring it pretty heavy in the spring. The goal, I think the best outcome would be to burn in the spring, because they're gonna have to back burn a lot of the grass And if they could do that in the spring, it would have time to grow back for the fall. But at this point, I think if they can just burn a lot of the timber, we're pretty excited. So the conservation camp meadow, that was, yeah, so like Mark mentioned, they initially, they burned it. And then instead of, so the problem with plowing that field, I mean, there's rock, there's boulders out there you dig up, nobody want to see. It'd be scary, and you'd run through equipment. So they burned it to get all of it down, and then they sprayed it. They sprayed it twice to kill specifically the Great Basin wild rye. That stuff gets that high, it just gets really decadent. It's not a great source. So after they sprayed, they went and seeded it. And as most folks could see, it didn't go super great, but part of the issue that they had was so we have a range drill, a no-till drill. They weren't able, the road's too narrow to haul that up there. And so instead of using that, they use what's called an aerator that we use for a lot of winter range habitat improvement, a lot of mule deer stuff. But it aerates, but it also drills seed. It's a little smaller, but it's really heavy duty, and they were able to get it up there. Unfortunately, they had a breakdown. So this is kind of part of the problem, a breakdown after they started. And then once they got going again, they got it seeded, and it did come back. And I think a lot of folks didn't realize. So they are going to go back and seed it again, and they're going to put more of the grass mix in there, and then they're also going to put a cover crop on there, which will be beneficial. But the one thing that I think a lot of folks, they were expecting to see this big, beautiful field, knee-high grass, and with grass, I can't remember the saying, it sleeps, it creeps, and it leaks. So it takes several years for grass to take a hold and grow and produce. And so folks need to be patient. But I will say it did provide, from the time that I've been up there this fall and winter, or especially early winter, the sheep and deer loved whatever they planted in there. Even though there wasn't a lot of it, there was more deer in that field than I've seen for a long time, and sheep too. So even though it didn't take off and producing several tons an acre, it was still beneficial. But it is in the works. The plan is to continue to re-drill, to put a cover crop in, and hopefully things will take off.
Are those native species of plants that you're feeding?
I'm not sure what they put in there. It was a mix.
Who did that?
We did it. Yeah, our Habitat Next. Yep. Yeah. So we did just recently kind of got together, brainstorming, looking for ways to improve winter range habitat. And one of the ideas that we came up with, and we've got it approved through our regional, we're going to move forward with it, just and try to get some funding, which Amy's really good at, so it shouldn't be a problem. But the thought is to thin the face of Torrey Rim. There's been a lot of conifer encroachment. While it's not super thick conifers, there are places that are pretty choked off with limber pine and some juniper. And it's just one of those areas where the sheep really like it. It's game and fish property. It's going to be pretty easy to do. It's kind of like a low-hanging fruit where we can make some headway and do some good. So that's going to be hopefully coming up in a few years. And anyway, so hopefully we can move on with that pretty quickly. Go back to continuing the cheatgrass. So in 2021 they sprayed, there's cheatgrass. So before we did the prescribed fire, before we started this deal, they did a huge survey to look for weeds, noxious weeds, and they found cheatgrass along the rim there before you get on the flat, just right off the end. And in 2021 they sprayed it with a helicopter with the new chemical. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a really new promising chemical to control cheatgrass. And unfortunately, what we're learning is it requires some not super specific conditions, but there needs to be some moisture in the soil. And after that treatment, it was extremely dry year. And so they think, so we didn't get as good a kill as we had wanted, but that chemical, there is residual. And so we're just going to give it time. And they think, because cheatgrass takes off early in the spring, and we don't think there was enough moisture at that time, but there was moisture later in the year to help. So we're still monitoring that, and we're hoping the company that designed the chemical is pretty optimistic that given it another year we're gonna see some improvements on that.
A chemical, it's called Juber.
Yep, that's what it is. Yep, and we've used it in several places, and Amy's very happy with it. It's been awesome. And the forest, which is kind of with the prescribed burn, they can use it, but they can't use it using an aerial application. So they can use it as long as it's on the ground, but they can't spray via helicopter. The BLM, I think, is trying to get approved. They haven't yet, but yeah. Then, so this is, I don't know if this is part of Habitat, but it is in our plan to, address commingling issues and anything we're aware of. And that one, I mean, that's going to take everybody. I think if everyone is aware of the issue, and through education and just talking to your neighbors. I mean, there's people that just don't understand or don't know, and we've had some issues here this year of domestic livestock still. If you the best thing we can do is educate those folks, and everybody can. I mean, but we would like to be made aware of it as well, so we can help educate and make the folks aware of the problems and the risk that it has with bighorn sheep. I mean, it's certainly, especially with all the work we're doing, it's somebody has a pet goat or sheep, can take away a lot of work that's gone on for years. So anyway, that's, we all can take a part in this. We just all need to be aware and vigilant and share, especially with us when you see somebody with domestic livestock.
Thanks, Zach. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Could I ask you to highlight a little bit more on that commingling? So I think in the DuBois, I know in my neighborhood, we're faced with that right now, where we see domestic goats.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit more about the risk? Emphasize that, and what do we do as a community?
As a community, I would say just, you can inform us I think if you have a relationship with those folks, you could start the conversation with them. That would go a long way, versus especially some folks having a government truck roll up and say, hey, this is a problem. I think it would go a lot further with a friend or a neighbor or someone who has a relationship with those folks. Yeah, so the risk is just the fact that they're in contact or close contact with each other. And sheep, bighorn wild sheep, are for some reason attracted to similar species, whether it's goats or sheep. They just kind of want to be by them, and so they see them and they just do. And there's, I think and folks can correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of the distance that everyone goes with is 10 feet. We don't know exactly how far that is, but an aerial bacteria, one's coughing or sneezing, I mean, it can travel quite a ways. And so the goal is just a separation. That's the goal. We can't, the problem with inoculating domestics, especially certain species like goats, they're intermittent shedders, so you could test them and they come up negative. It's not that they don't have it, you didn't detect it. And the next time, and especially with goats when they're pregnant, they are good at hiding it. So it's really hard. So the easiest solution is separation, keeping at least a 10-foot separation between, a double fence or two barriers where the wild sheep can't get within 10 feet of the domestics. That's the best solution. Again, vaccinating domestics, while it prevents the disease or the symptoms, they can still carry the pathogen. So while you see your domestic sheep or goat may not look sick, it still is carrying the bacteria. That answer?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And your resources,
Yep, yeah, and I can get a list to share with folks. There's a lot of work into this and a lot of information out there and what you can do and
and financial resources. I think the National Bighorn Sheep Center wants to take a role, and let's say if there is a risk, right? We identify domestic goats. The National Bighorn Sheep Center has funds that can help mitigate that risk. It
Correct.
doesn't completely eliminate it altogether, but if somebody were to choose to build a double fence, National Bighorn Sheep Center, one, first and foremost, wants to help educate and to help mitigate the risk if complete separation isn't a solution. Yes, Steve.
You might double check that distance, Zach, way, Tom Besser talks about 100 feet and double fences. There's always a flood, there's a snow,
Sure.
there's a blizzard, the snow gets blown over the fence and
yeah, and
double fencing is not a very strong recommendation. Just plain separation is what's really good. And we in this state have spent about $5 million creating separation in the core native herds. So
Yep.
it's a big deal.
it is, and the most recent WAFWA literature was, it was double fencing was the best, especially for, obviously range sheep, it's a completely different situation. We don't, as far as I know, there are no allotments that allow domestic sheep grazing. So that's most of what I'm talking about is homeowners with their pet goats. And we live in sheep winter range, and they show up in places where there could be domestic livestock. But you're right. I mean, on allotments where we have large areas of domestic sheep separation, just staying away is So and we do, like Sarah said, I mean, we also, while the Game and Fish doesn't have funds to provide people for fencing, we do have a lot of partners, or we know a lot of folks that we could reach out to see about helping fund a fencing project. So
Zach, just information wise, as we go south of the highway, pack goats are not allowed in a
Correct.
Whiskey Basin area, and a lot of the area adjacent to it, don't have a map right in front of me, but
Yeah.
then some areas they are allowed, but they have to get a permit with disease inspection and testing before they take their pack goats.
Correct.
So it's a pretty
it's rigorous.
serious deal.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
so, yeah.
It is, because I mean, it just takes one and it will spread like wildfire, really. And that's literally one animal could create a lot of problems. So it's very important. And we all need to know about it and be aware of it. So like I said, this is something everyone can help.
Just a quick question for Steve. With the pack goats and the testing, is that a per trip test or a seasonal test?
I think it's seasonal, but you'd have to ask Joe Flowers with the Forest Service or somebody else with the Forest Service. It's their rule, their regulation, their permitting system. But that went to court, 3 years ago? That lasted for a couple of years in court. We had a lot of meetings on it, came out, and the Forest Service implemented that. And talk about a special place. That's the only place in the nation where that rule is in existence. It's not in existence on any other national forest. But the concern for disease transmission, the judge ruled.
Yeah.
That, hey.
Lynn, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, well, I was just gonna bring up what Steve did as far as the pack goes. But several years ago, the EA ranch up here,
Speak up just so that, or come up here while listening, just so people in the other.
I speak loud enough, most people can
You
hear
do.
me, but the EA ranch up here a few years ago had previous owners who did have sheep. And the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation, we were involved and I was on that board to help build a double fence around that. And as far as I know, they've never had any issues with that. And the double fencing did work. And Tracy did have sheep for several years before they sold out and moved. Now the sheep are gone, but it did work.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zach.
You bet.
Thanks for answering our questions.
Okay, So test remove. I don't know why this is blue and the other ones weren't, but whatever. That's the creativity part, actually. Thank you. Okay, so test remove. I mean, is everyone familiar with what, we spoke about it last year. I don't know how far you want me to dive into why we're doing it or any of that. I sure can. And I will a little bit. So through Rachel and Brittany's work from UW, we learned that the lambs were mostly dying from pneumonia. I mean, there's obviously other factors, and again, I'll preface by saying this isn't a silver bullet. This isn't gonna, this isn't the only reason. Just from Rachel and Jack's presentation, there's many other problems. There's a lot of other factors. It's never, which is kind of with wildlife in general, there's never just one thing. But yeah, through their work, we learned that lambs were dying of imovie specifically, and now it's kind of what was causing our extremely low lamb recruitment. We just weren't seeing any lambs on the landscape. So we in collaboration with the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho, we started the test and remove on the Red Creek subherd. And we developed some guidelines, some criteria to identify chronic carriers. And that's changing, and we're all learning and evolving because there's a lot of other states in the West doing this, and we're all while we're all kind of in the same boat, we're all individual, we're all different too. There's different characteristics for each herd. But anyway, so our criteria to identify a chronic carrier is 2 testing events within a 12-month period. And there has to be at least 3 months in between the testing events. So it's working really good with Monteith's shop because they're doing their biannual captures anyway. So the 12-month period gives us 3 testing opportunities. And then having the 12 months apart, we don't get our hands on every sheep every time. So once those have been identified, they're slated for removal. And so far today, we've identified 11 chronic carriers, and as of yesterday, we've had 10 removed. There's 1 still, and really the critical part. Well, that's all critical. We would try to remove them as soon as we identify them, but really just trying to get them removed at the very minimum before lambing season, because that's, as Rachel is kind of alluding to, and Jack with the different groups. The ewe has a lamb, she gives it to her lamb, that lamb goes in the nursery group, gives it all the other lambs, and then they tip over from there. Hold on, I do have some stuff written down. I'm going to look at it so I don't say something wrong.
Zach, could I ask a question?
Sure.
Just for context, what proportion of the females in that suburb does this represent? The 10 of 11, how much proportion of the suburb is that?
I don't know. It's hard to say because we don't count every sheep on the subherd. Is that what you're asking?
Is that half of the females?
No, I don't think so. It's hard to say because those sheep move. It's not just those right there. They're different sheep. We're catching sheep that we never caught previously. So they do move back and forth. They're not just right there when you drive by the highway. It's just not that little group. There's a lot of other sheep in there that we don't see. So it's hard to guess how many. I would say, it's hard to say how many there are.
Half, 20%?
I don't even really want to venture a guess. Yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah.
But not half.
No, this is not half of the ewes out there. Yeah, there's still plenty more ewes. Yeah, we're not. Yeah.
It's significant, but 25% or less.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Always use.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So part of our criteria right now is we are going to test everything, including rams. But that's, again, we reevaluate as we learn more. So Okay, so what I was saying was the chronic carriers. So the initial, so last March 2022, we identified 7 chronic carriers. We removed all of those 7 prior to lambing season. 6 of those 7 had chronic pneumonia, where you opened them up and their lungs were just were pretty horrendous. So it was obvious chronic pneumonia.
Did they have sinus tumors also? Getting there.
We do. I didn't write that down, but there was, I can't remember. There was a couple of them that did. Not, yep, not all of them did, but that's still, we're still looking at that. Every sheep we remove gets inspected for sinus tumors. It's pretty interesting because the way we have the cultures and the PCRs on that animal while it was alive, and then we have the ability, once we remove it, to look for sinus tumors. So there's no way to look for sinus tumors in mortem yet. We're thinking about it. I got some ideas, but anyway, so all 7 of them though had MOB. They all tested positive even after we removed them. And then the last 3 that we've removed, we've been trying to. The state vet labs lost several pathologists, and so they're really undermanned right now. So unfortunately, we're not able to send the whole carcasses to the lab to get necropsy, which is unfortunate, but which we were able to do with all 7 of the previous ones. These last 3 that we've recently removed, we've been donating them. Once we've had our disease specialists look at their lungs and organs to make sure they're not chronic, and they haven't been. They've all been, I mean, I don't want to say healthy because they're obviously have disease, but they do. The lungs were not like the chronic carriers, but they all have tested positive for MOB. So, and then we've been able to donate 2 of them, and then we also, it's been a pretty good deal. The tribes were interested in hides for some of their cultural traditions, the hides and the dew claws. So we've been skinning them and getting them to those guys. Anything else in this meeting? Yeah, sure. So again, this is not a silver bullet, nothing to get right home about, but so this is just the herd overall, and it's pretty confusing graph, but you do see, so this is, I don't know, I don't want to bore people, but you see like the bottom, we've hit bottom in 2017, and in subsequent years, they just sort of coming back. This is not Red Creek specific. This is areas 9, 10, and the herd unit as a whole, and that big red line includes everything. Unfortunately, the last 2 years, we haven't been able to fly Area 8 due to budget cuts and weather. But we're seeing a bounce back. And one of the things that I've kind of visiting with Frances Kessier, who maybe folks, you guys had a webinar with her, she's a great person. I've been visiting with her, and one of the thoughts we're talking about is, you see, maybe this was an outbreak and a die-off. And maybe it's sort of ending and we're coming back. Now, when you start seeing lamb recruitment, the thought is there may be fewer individuals in the herd that are chronic carriers. So if you strike out to move on this test and remove, you may be removing fewer individuals than if you did it when it was back here. If that makes sense. So we're trying. Our hope is to extend from Red Creek to the rest of the herd. And part of that is seeing lamb recruitment in areas 9 and 10, like Torrey Creek and Whiskey Mountain, where we're seeing more lambs, may be an indication that there would be fewer individuals that we'd have to remove. My ugly face is there, but you can see this is just a trend count for since 1989, and this is just all the sheep we've counted in the herd, and you just see it's declined for a long time. And again, unfortunately, the last few years we haven't had counts in Area 8, so You know, that certainly doesn't help because they do have good numbers of sheep over there, but just kind of for a visual of an overall downward trend.
Zach, can you talk about counts versus your estimate number?
So this is just the total number of sheep that I see or we see Greg's seen in the past. That's all the sheep that you counted. The number, so previously Greg would use a model up until like 2017 or 18 when, and to inform the model, use classification data, your ewes, lambs, rams, yearling rams. Unfortunately, the sample size was so low that we just didn't feel the model was being it was very accurate. Your confidence intervals were pretty wide. So we don't even guess how many sheep. I mean, anybody could take a guess, but we don't have any model or anything. Okay, cool. That might be the end of it. But I will, so I did, what else I got here? So going back to the test remove with the Red Creek subherd. So this isn't, I don't know, this isn't like a cause and effect. This is just an interesting observation, I guess, if you will. So this year, after removing those ewes and after lambing season, we counted 7 lambs in this subherd. We haven't counted 7 lambs in this subherd for years, for at least, I mean, I could have kept going, but I went the last 5 years. And the closest number of lambs we've seen is 7 is 2. And we actually did have 8, but the little guy didn't make it. He was pretty rough. But the interesting thing is we're seeing more lambs so far with fewer ewes. So like in the past, you know, we were seeing 2 lambs, but we were counting over 20 ewes. This year, we counted 7 lambs and there was only 15 ewes. So, I mean, your ratios are just incredible, and it's hard to, you know, I could spout off the ratio, but it might, you know, I don't want to alarm anybody because it is pretty amazing, but it's just an interesting observation. I don't think, you know, everyone should be like, this is it, we're on our way, but it is interesting. And you know, and we're not the only one. This is an experiment. You know, people across the West are doing this and seeing really good results. So not everyone is seeing great results, but a lot of folks are seeing really good results. So this isn't, it's not like we're just trying some weird random thing. It's been done other places. What else? Anybody interested in, let's see, I wrote something else down here. Oh, the whiskey herd. I was just gonna give you guys some lamb ratios for this year, which is, you know, the second, third year in a row of really good lamb recruitment in the whiskey. So in 2022, 39 lambs per 100 ewes for a herd unit wide, which is really good. 40 per 100 ewes for area 9 and 39 per 100 ewes for area 10. But again, that's you know, this should be interpreted with caution because we didn't have a really high sample size again this year. But still, I mean, we're seeing lambs on the ground, which is good. So, yeah.
We have one question from Kathy Trainer, former board president. Zach, is it true that if domestic sheep or goats transmit disease to wild bighorns, then the entire wild herd is euthanized?
No, so there's some discretion there that we have, but our man, I don't even have it memorized, but if we suspect that there was some commingling, we are required to remove those sheep. The whole herd, no, but say if there's a little handful of sheep come down and we suspect or have evidence of commingling, we will go remove those small numbers of sheep. We're not, you know, if we can't, we can't remove the bulk of them, but we can, and we're kind of required to, I guess, part of our protocol. That's why, commingling is such a big deal.
Big deal. big mission here to help educate around those.
Yes,
those
it very
science
is, yes,
issues. And
very
that's
good.
why the Wild Sheep webinar series, we address these topics. Test and remove was a very big portion of our annual meeting last year. And in response to that, we asked Dr. Francis Kasier out of Hell's Canyon, Idaho, who helped with the restoration of that herd through test and remove, to come discuss the science behind why that is an effective method. So thank you, Zach, for touching on that. Before we give it to Steve Kilpatrick to,
Oh, Steve, gonna talk something. I had a question for Steve.
oh,
Actually, what I wanted to share with the group was something the Bridger Teton Forest proposed, I think, just over a year ago. And decided to wait for the forest plan revision, but our friend Magagna, he proposed something, and I'm not sure if Gary Butler's still on, but back in the early 80s, when I moved to Big Piney from Jackson Hole, I was involved with a sheep transplant from Whiskey. We received sheep for the Darby Fish Creek Mountain area. That herd took off after those transplants in 81 and 84. And then it turns out we actually, in fact, in the forest planning effort at that time, they converted those two former sheep allotments that were bought out by conservation groups to retire those two allotments, and they named them Bighorn sheep allotments, not domestic sheep allotments. And that was because of the work that Gary Butler had done there when he was a biologist in Smoot, Wyoming. But he worked on that effort, and I was the recipient of that by getting there with a different biologist at the time, Bruce Johnson, and we transplanted sheep that herd from Whiskey, and they did really well. And then it turns out we think what happened was they did so well that they moved out of those areas and into other domestic sheep areas. The population declined. Now that herd is not part of the core herd, but it is near and dear to my heart. And they proposed to reestablish those as domestic sheep allotments. And at the request of Jim Magagna, who was a permittee in adjacent areas, who was caught, his herder was caught in those closed areas with their sheep pens. And he was told, the guy that caught him there or saw him there was told, my boss told me that I could move my sheep to here. So anyway, I sent a letter to the forest supervisor saying that it's really a bad idea. It goes against all the work that people put into that a long time ago. And how will an organizations send money and donate money to help with future buyouts if in return, 40 years later, they're turned back to domestic sheep allotments? Anyway, I didn't know whether you've had any update as to whether the forest is, I know you've got your pulse on that, but I didn't know whether you've had any follow-up. They just said they were going to evaluate that in the forest plan revision. But I never got a response back from the forest supervisor either. That group.
Do this too.
Is there a response to that? Finish the, that'd be great. Yeah.
Another thing for us to keep in mind.
Yeah, the allotments you're talking about, yeah, those have not been revisited by domestic sheep. The original ones when you were there, there were allotment buyouts after that. The forest did that on their own without incentive, economic incentive or payment from conservation groups. There are allotments around that are in various status from forage reserve to vacancy, but not closure. The two you're talking about are in fact closed, but they're so small that sheep can't really live there.
True, and that's probably the reason the population.
And then, yeah,
But what happened was that Gary Butler, who was instrumental in getting the forest to make those into sheep allotments.
Yeah, I don't know. I was there when that forest plan was adopted in '89 and Gary was over here, but he may have had some influence on it.
This is early 80s.
Okay.
When he was still in there.
So the status is, that is the Game and Fish and the ag interest met from 2000 to 2004 to develop the domestic sheep, wild sheep working group plan. Larry Hicks and others thought it was important to codify that in statute, and it was done in 2015. So that plan has some law behind it. It's not really a plan. Yeah, it's not really a plan as it is recommendations, but so with that, it did take that herd unit, and the Game and Fish decided it wasn't that important in the big perspective. So that all herds got categorized into core native herds, which is the most important. And then there were cooperative review herds. There are 8 core native herds, and then cooperative review herds, and then non-essential. And so non-emphasis, not essential. That one ended up non-emphasis, the lowest on the totem pole. So there was an effort just within the last year for the BT to put an amendment in the existing plan, which was approved in 1990. So we got a 30-year-old plan. That amendment was proposed to be added to. Forest Supervisor O'Connor said no. After all the public input, a lot of negative input from the public, similar to what you said, but there is a lot of confusion around it because it's very complicated, to be honest. Said no, wait, put this off until the new forest plan and address it at the new forest plan. And Patricia O'Connor, her decision with a memo to the file says, I'm going to put this off until the new forest plan is revised. So it got dropped for right now, but there will be something to be addressed in the new forest plan.
Forest Management Planning Act requires that they watch for all wildlife species, so just because it's state law made it not necessary.
Yeah, and bighorn sheep, the quandary therein is a lot of state pressure from the governor's office on down, and especially the politicians to manage that herd as a non-emphasis herd as per the state plan, which the forest couldn't sign that agreement. And the sheep, bighorn sheep in the BT are a sensitive species. On the Shoshone, they're a new category, species of conservation concern. But that plan at the BT is so old, they're still considered sensitive species. So can the forest let that herd sort of die out, even though they're keeping the other herds on the BT alive and doing well? Can they let that one sort of go? Federal indications are no, it's a sensitive species no matter where those sheep are, and ignores, shouldn't say ignore, it doesn't coincide with the state's plan of a non-emphasis herd. There's not such a thing in the federal policy of a non-emphasis herd of bighorn sheep on the BT. So there's a conflict in state law and federal policy or law. I don't know if that answered your question. We could talk all day about it.
No, it's just that.
It's a lot, yeah.
I knew that she had put it on the back burner.
Yep, with a letter to the file.
Well, thank you. Before I hand it to Steve Kilpatrick for our concluding remarks, thank each and every one of you for coming out today. Your input is critical. It helps shape our programs, drive our mission, and education starts here, and you guys can help us spread our message. I'd like to specifically thank Pam Buline, who's in the audience today on behalf of Senator Barrasa's office. Virtually today, we had the Butlers join us, Dita and John Dobb. Kathy Trainer were a few names. Thank you so much. Your continued support is critical. With that, I'll pass it to Steve Kilpatrick to wrap up.
Thank you. I wrote a book. I'm just going to read one chapter. Is that okay? Our leader right now, Ms. Carolyn Gillette, said, why are we here? Why are we in the trenches? Why are us board members spending hundreds of hours? Why do we have 4 hired staff? Why do we have a building? That sent me home, and so got out the gin and tonic and then, all right, here's why we're here. And it goes back a long way. Sheep eaters were here before we were here. And you know, us humans have cared about sheep in this area for frickin' ever. We can go back hundreds of years, thousands of years, who knows how far, but God, right here. I mean, this place is so special. I think there are 30, a little over 30 sheep traps known in the world. 18 are right around Dubois. What the heck? Isn't that amazing? And then, you know, fast forward to the Sheep Center, almost 30 years ago. Some of you folks were involved, but this community was so excited about sheep. Of course, then we had a great herd out here, which is Acker's going to bring back in a couple of years. We had this great herd, and you know, here's a sheep center, and Game and Fish, the building belongs to them. It's on town property. I know the BLM kicked in $100,000. Forest Service kicked in a bunch. Bunch of you guys did a whole bunch of work. Would that happen today? Might be pretty hard, but anyway, we have it. Thank God. Yeah, we had the largest bighorn herd in the lower 48 at the time. We were on a great roll. And that's kind of why we're here today. We got this building here. And yeah, we're here because of you. And we also are here today because this herd, which we admired so much, and one of the better ones in the world, went on a decline. And gosh dang it, you know, that kind of rocked our boat a little bit. And I just have to say, hats off. Of course, am I biased? I work for Game and Fish. I don't think I am. I was actually kind of critical of my agency. I was considered kind of rogue once in a while. But those guys did a hell of a job. They brought in 8 experts from across the West in 2018. And then they got the community together 4 times, and sometimes over 100 of you showed up in a town of less than 1,000 people. Tell me how often that happens, that 100 people show up at a public meeting because they care about their wildlife. And then the Game and Fish sat down, had all the agencies together. They soaked up every bit of brain power they could. And I really encourage you to go on their website and look at the Whiskey Basin Bighorn Sheep Plan. That's the guiding document that Zach just said. Here's the things we've checked off on the boxes. And outstanding job. I know of no other effort like that for bighorn sheep in the West, but it happened in this little town. So thank you guys. So we're also here about providing education and outreach relative to wild sheep nationwide. We're trying to expand. And our staff is doing the best they can, as well as our board members. And why are we having this effort? You know, this is the only facility, this is the only organization in the world that advocates for bighorn sheep in an educational way. We're the only one. I mean, I can't believe that. There's no other facility like this, no other emphasis like this. And recently we've hooked up with other chapters and affiliates. There's 30 some across the nation in Canada. Also with the National Wild Sheep Foundation, Ryan Brock, a PhD in education, lives down by Reno. Our staff is in constant coordination with Ryan Brock across the nation. And what can we do to help? Where can we go educate? They were in Reno, you just heard 1,800 kids there, doing a fantastic job. And then let's get down to the nitty gritty. Why bighorn sheep? You know, some people are passionate about sandhill cranes, great horned owls, who names what? But bighorn sheep, well, here's why our passion's here. Let's look at the history. There were 1.5 to 2 million bighorn sheep estimated at the end of the 1800th century. So late 1800s, early 1900s, sheep galore. One of the most successful wild ungulates on the face of this planet. They did extremely well. Fast forward to 1960s, we're down to 25,000 bighorns in the entire United States. Millions and millions of dollars went into sheep. And now we're maybe up to 85,000 nationwide. Still a far cry from the 1.5 million to 2 million that we used to have. Wyoming, it's some of its guesswork. You know, the Shoshones, the early explorers, heck, they lived off of sheep right here. Probably tens, if not close to 100,000 in the state. We don't know for sure. But by 1960, we were down to 2,500 sheep in the state. Through the work of all this partnership and Game and Fish leading the way, now we're back up to about 6,000 to 6,500. So we're making a bit of a difference. It's slow and it's extremely costly. These little kids that we take care of that we call sheep are high end. They take a lot of maintenance. Game and Fish, last I checked, the sheep program is about $1.5 to $1.6 million a year to manage bighorn sheep in this state. They sell less than 200 tags, so round figures, they might bring in $200,000 off of tag sales. Tell me the deficit between $200,000 and $1.5 million. It's people like you that make it up. And nationwide, the sheep program across the nation is only funded 20% through the state agencies. And the other 80% steal from other species like elk and deer in this state and the money generated by local publics. 80% of the program. It's amazing. And I also want to thank you guys. Here's why we're here as an organization, and because of you folks, is you folks had the vision of putting kids on the mountain with sheep. And if we don't put kids on the mountain with sheep today, we're not going to have sheep tomorrow because no one's going to care. It's a hard fight. It's a hard fight to keep sheep out there. And if we don't have a vision into the future and subscribe to what this organization is doing, which is outreach and education, and now trying to expand nationwide, no one's going to care if there are sheep on the mountain in the future. So thank you guys for being the core of this. You guys are the rebar and cement of all of our efforts nationwide. Thank you. Next year, in our expansion, one thing I hope we can do is we'll definitely have the local folks, Game and Fish, present on what's happening here in our back door, but I think it'd be fun to hear what's going on, good and bad, nationwide with sheep. So let's expand. I think we got the opportunity to do that with Daryl Lutz being connected to the entire West. That's pretty exciting. He could easily stand up here and give us a perspective of what's happening with sheep across the nation. And with that, I'll shut my trap and just thank you so much.